Well, I'm Sinclair Ferguson. As my accent betrays, I'm Scottish. I'm a minister actually in the Associate Reformed Presbyterian Church. Well, what I have here now is a book called The Marrow of Modern Divinity, which Christian Focus under the Christian Heritage imprint have reproduced in a very attractive version. This is actually a book from the 17th century, and the author simply put his initials on it for reasons that we probably shouldn't go into. But his name was Edward Fisher. And this book was not a particularly important book in the 17th century, but in the early 1700s, a Scottish minister by the name of Thomas Boston, who was minister in a very small church in the south-east of Scotland, was visiting a man who I think had fought in the English Civil War. And he noticed on the window ledge 2 books. And one of them was this book, The Marrow of Modern Divinity. And he borrowed it, and it changed his ministry, and in many ways changed his life. And he says that as a result of that, people who didn't know anything about this book, people noticed there was something different about his ministry. He said they noticed there was a certain tincture, that's the word he uses, about his ministry. And the book is interesting because it's in the form of a very extensive dialogue among 4 different people. If someone had a classical education and had read, Plato, Aristotle, they would find that much of that early Greek philosophy was presented in the form of dialogues, where there would be a topic, and then the master would begin to expound it in response to the questions that others asked, and different points of view would be presented, and then the problem would be resolved. And Fisher used that format in The Marrow of Modern Divinity. And he has 4 characters. One is called Evangelista, and he is the pastor. And he's a reformed, evangelical, orthodox, warm-hearted, caring minister. And then there's somebody who is called Neophytus, who is a new Christian. And then there's somebody who is a legalist and somebody who is an antinomian. And so the whole book involves how does the pastor the new Christian through the competing emphasis of someone who says you need to keep the law in order to essentially enjoy your salvation. You need to keep the law if you're going to be accepted before God. And then even endangering, you need to keep the law if you're ever going to be justified. And on the other hand, the antinomian who is saying, the law finished with Christ and it's got no place in the Christian life. And so the dialogue is worked through, but then there's another very unusual element in this book, and that is that it's full of quotations from other Christian writers. So it's not just there's a dialogue of different views, but there are different theologians, especially 17th century, 16th century reformers, all come into it as the case is argued out. And in fact, in some ways, for people who are interested in the history of theology, it is a bit like somebody making a dramatic video of a discussion that might be found in the scholastic theologian Thomas Aquinas. So theological issues come to light in a very personal and practical way. And at the center of this are very fundamental questions about what is the relationship between the law and the gospel. How does the grace of God relate to the law of God, on the one hand, and then on the other hand, what was a big question in the 17th century, and has always been a big question in Reformed theology, to what extent may believers enjoy the assurance of salvation? And obviously I've read The Marrow of Modern Divinity, and Thomas Boston, who rediscovered The Marrow of Modern Divinity and then went on to write notes on it, has always been a great hero figure of mine, because he ministered in out-of-the-way places, and yet his ministry is still touching people's lives today. I've always admired him as a theologian and as a pastor. And not only, therefore, is The Marrow of Modern Divinity a pretty significant book to read, but Boston's notes, which are reprinted, some of them are small notes, some of them are actually extended essays, and in this edition they are printed as extended essays. They punctuate the book. In my own view, they are of even more value than the book itself. So this is really quite a treasure. In fact, I noticed my friend Derek Thomas says The Marrow of Modern Divinity is one of the most important theological texts of all time. But it's a book for all Christians, because the people in this book are wrestling with the kind of issues that Christians are wrestling with all the time. And it's also, I think it's really quite an important book for ministers to read, because it will help them engage with those questions and think them through biblically. And as I say, Thomas Boston's notes are particularly helpful. In fact, in Scotland in the 1700s, there was a controversy related to this book, but not just about this book, that became known as the Marrow controversy. And the book itself was banned in the Church of Scotland. Ministers were not to recommend it to members of the congregation. As far as I know, that ban has never been lifted. But as somebody said who was in that tradition, I'm under the ban and I can't recommend that you read The Marrow of Modern Divinity, but I do urge you to read Thomas Boston's notes on it. So that's The Marrow of Modern Divinity. And I think it may well be read now more than it has been read for 150 years. So it's really worth having.